We had a lot going on over the weekend in Birdland, so a special Super Bowl Sunday edition to get to it all on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Sunday, February 9th, 2025, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we're going to jump into some Orioles news and notes that we missed over the past few days, with Danny Coulombe finally finding a contract somewhere outside of Baltimore, the Orioles claiming Roansy Contreras for the second time this offseason, and we'll talk about the list of non-roster invitees that the Orioles announced they are bringing to big league spring training, which starts up later this week. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started today. So let's jump right in with the Danny Coulombe news. We have continued to cover the 2024 Orioles, who are free agents who have signed elsewhere so far. The Orioles still to this point, whether it's the guys who are becoming free agents either way, or the guys like Coulombe, who the Orioles made a decision to send them to free agency, the Orioles have not really brought any of these guys back. We know Corbin Burnes has signed with the Arizona Diamondbacks. Anthony Santander has signed with the Toronto Blue Jays. Austin Slater with the White Sox. Jacob Webb with the Texas Rangers. And Danny Coulombe now is the next name on that list, as he has signed a one-year, $3 million deal to head back to Minnesota and play for the Twins. Now, it was one of his original teams. He had been with the Twins for 3 seasons from 2020 through 2022, and it was the Twins that had originally kind of told Danny Coulombe, hey, you're not going to make the opening day roster in 2023. Coulombe was coming off of hip surgery. He had missed most of the 2022 season. He had been effective at times with the Twins in the past, but they were really worried about that injury. He was getting into his 30s, and I think they just thought he doesn't have much left. So they were willing to deal him away. He had a clause in his contract where he could basically choose to opt out and be traded if he wasn't going to make the opening day roster. That's exactly what he did. And they found a trade partner. The Orioles sent some cash to Minnesota, and the O's kind of right before opening day got a final piece in their bullpen. And we weren't really sure what to make of Danny Coulombe at that point when that trade happened, like 2 days before opening day of 2023. Like, he had been good in his time on the field in Minnesota, but over the previous 3 seasons, it had been fewer than 50 total innings in those 3 years with the Twins because of injuries and other things. So you just weren't quite sure what you were getting. And clearly, the Orioles knew what they were getting, because Coulombe threw 51 in the third innings and posted a 2.81 ERA in 2023. I mean, it was tremendous stuff. 28% to 6% strikeout to walk ratio, helping the Orioles win the division as really their best lefty reliever in that 2023 season. And then he returned this year and was really just as good when he was on the field. 29 and 2/3 innings, posted a 2.12 ERA for the Orioles. Strikeouts went down, or really strikeouts went up, I should say, a little bit, and walks went down. He was absolutely tremendous. 30% strikeout rate, 5% walk rate. Opponents hit just 147 against Coulombe this year. He was looking even better. And then the elbow injury came. And that is really the reason why Danny Coulombe is not back in this Oriole bullpen in 2025. He comes up with the elbow issue in June. June 8th is the last time he pitches for the Orioles, throws 2 scoreless innings against Tampa, and then something's wrong. And he has to go on the injured list, and we're not quite sure. Coulombe, when talking to the media, basically said, hey, it's not the elbow injury you think. So at that point, we knew it wasn't Tommy John surgery. We knew there was a chance he'd be back in the 2024 season, but it was still kind of unclear for a while what was going on with Coulombe's elbow. Well, finally, he got surgery, and we learned that it was, I believe, bone chips were in there. He had to get surgery to remove some bone chips. He basically missed 3+ months of the season as the Orioles were struggling down the stretch. They did not have their go-to lefty reliever. Keegan Aiken was thrown into some spots. They traded for Gregory Soto to try and fill that void. Cianel Perez was working a bigger role as well and having mixed results. But The bullpen held it together, certainly, but they could have used the old version of Danny Coulombe. Well, luckily, he came back. September 20th, he rejoined the roster, pitched in 4 regular season games down the stretch before the postseason, and he did not allow an earned run in those 4 outings when he came back from the injury. But you could tell it was not the same Danny Coulombe. The stuff was way down. This was a guy who already was not throwing super hard, and he didn't really need to throw super hard. This is a heavy breaking ball pitcher with 5 different offerings who could mix and match and really keep hitters off balance. It was impressive what he could do. But when he came back, you almost, in that sense, yeah, it's fine that you don't throw hard, but you also don't have a lot of wiggle room on your velocity. And when you go on the injured list throwing 91, 92 with your 4-seamer and you come back and you're throwing 89, some of that could be, hey, just shaking off the rust from the injured list. But he was pitching in a good amount of rehab games throughout September in AAA Norfolk and had enough chances to get the velocity back up, and it never really came back. The spin rates on his pitches were all down. The movement profile was a little bit down, and the velocity was down across the board. And when you come off some sort of elbow surgery, even if it's not Tommy John, and you have all of those metrics down, the red flags start to come up. Now, he was on the postseason roster, and he did pitch in Game 2 of the AL wild card, and the Orioles still used him, but I think they kind of knew this is somewhat concerning. Now, I think the interesting part was the Orioles kind of had a pretty easy way to bring him back. There was a club option on his contract for 2025 that the Orioles had a chance to pick up. It was only 1 year and $4 million, and I figured the Orioles would just do that. And I thought, hey, even if he is having struggles and there's questions about his arm, for $4 million for a guy who's been your best lefty reliever for the past year and a half, I think you can eat $4 million. And if it doesn't go well, you can DFA him in the middle of the season. It's not that big of a deal. But the Orioles must have thought, because, hey, we've seen them, like, they just signed Ramon Laureano for a 1-year, $4 million deal. At best, Laureano becomes a nice platoon bench bat throughout the year. At worst, Laureano's DFA'd in June, and the Orioles don't really care about the $4 million. That's a nice part about having David Rubenstein in charge now, is they can make these smaller deals and not feel like it's going to hurt them at all when it is these little 1-year deals. So that's why I thought, hey, just pick up the option and let's see what he can do in camp. But the Orioles clearly, and some of it had to do with the fact that they didn't have any bullpen flexibility. Like, the Orioles barely have any guys with minor league options in this bullpen, and Coulombe was going to be a guy who was out of options. And so they made their decision to decline his $4 million option. And we talked about at the time when the Orioles did it back in November, why they did it and why the injury was certainly a concern. But we also talked about the surprise and just like, hey, you might as well see what he can do. It's only $4 million. But as the offseason rolled on and more relievers were signing and Coulombe was still out there, and then the fact that he gets less money, the 1-year, $3 million from the Twins, and it had to be a team that had seen him pitch for them for 3 years already, that does continue to raise the red flags. Like, it might be cooked, the elbow. I hope it's not. I mean, Danny Coulombe was such a huge part of this Orioles team. I will always love Danny Coulombe and his time in Baltimore. I wish him the absolute best heading back to Minnesota this year, but he is 35 years old with a lot of elbow troubles last year and a lot of the metrics going way down when he came back from that. And so you can see why the Orioles did not want to bring him back. It'll be something to watch, as he's probably going to have an opening day spot in that Twins bullpen. And we will kind of see, hey, can he recapture that magic of the last 2 years, or was that surgery just kind of the end? It'll be really just watching those first couple outings. Where's the velocity? Where's the spin rate? And Coulombe relies a lot on that movement and spin on those breaking pitches. And if he doesn't have it, it's a lefty with an 89-mile-per-hour fastball, and those guys can get hit if they don't have good secondary. So I still would have just taken the chance and given him the $4 million option. The Orioles declined it, let him hit free agency, and there seemed to be still some interest if he wanted to come back, maybe on a minor league deal, but good for Coulombe. He got the guaranteed major league deal back in Minnesota, and I certainly hope he does well and can continue his career in the Twins bullpen. But with Coulombe officially gone, the Orioles added, or you could say re-added, another potential relief option into their bullpen. They have claimed the same player for the second time this offseason. We'll talk a little bit more about Roansy Contreras coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine live bets into a same-game parlay. FanDuel's live betting feature is also great because it keeps every moment exciting. Whether you're looking for your team to get a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, you never feel like you missed your chance. And the app, it's so easy to use. And right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That is FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So from Danny Coulombe, we move on to Roansy Contreras. And you might say, Connor, you're talking about the Orioles claiming right-handed pitcher Roansy Contreras off waivers on Saturday. And you're thinking, am I having deja vu? Didn't the Orioles already claim Roansy Contreras off waivers this offseason? And if you're thinking that, well, you would be right, because this is the second time that the Orioles have done this offseason. Let's read out Roansy Contreras' crazy offseason so far. In October, after finishing the season in the Angels bullpen, he is waived by the Angels and on October 31st claimed off waivers by the Texas Rangers. December 12th, the Rangers DFA Roansy Contreras. December 19th, the Reds claim him off waivers. January 6th, the Reds designate Contreras for assignment. And on January 10th, the Orioles claim him. Then on January 16th, the Orioles DFA Roansy Contreras. January 23rd, the Yankees claim Contreras off waivers. And then in early February, quietly, the Yankees try and put Contreras back on waivers. And on February 7th, the Orioles claim Roansy Contreras off waivers from the New York Yankees. And at this point, I don't think his offseason is over. So for the second time this offseason, the Orioles have claimed him. So for a player to be thrown around that much, it means two things. Generally, it means he's not good enough at this point to be a definite opening day roster spot opened in somebody's bullpen. But also, he's good enough where so many teams are intrigued by his stuff that they're willing to take a chance on him, but it probably means he's out of options if you move him around this much, and that is the case. Contreras does not have minor league options, which means he's going to continue to be put on waivers. And as I mentioned the first time I talked about the Orioles making this move back in January, I said, hey, they are intrigued by the stuff. To give a little recap on Contreras, former top pitching prospect, he was with the Yankees. He was traded to the Pirates as a prospect in the Jameson Taillon deal. He debuted with the Pirates back in 2021, right at the end of the season. And then in 2022, 18 starts, a 3.79 ERA in the Pirates rotation. They had really high hopes for him. Comes back in 2023, part of the opening day rotation. Things kind of fall apart. He gets moved to the bullpen. He ends the season with a 6.59 ERA. Begins 2024 in the pen. Still looks bad. The Pirates DFA him on the day that they call up Paul Skeens. He ends up being claimed by the Angels and looks better, goes into the Angels bullpen, pitches 52 innings for the Angels, posts a 4.33 ERA, but the strikeouts were down, the walks were still high, and then the Angels DFA'd him at the end of the season, and the roster roulette began for Contreras this offseason. Now, people still like his stuff. He's trying to figure out what fastball to throw and really what pitches to throw. He threw 6 pitches this year: four-seamer, slider, changeup, sinker, curveball, and sweeper. And he threw them all at least 7% of the time this season with the Pirates and the Angels. So he's mixing and matching, trying to find something that can work and recapture the magic he had in the Pirates rotation back in 2022. I mean, he's still only 25 years old and was a former top pitching prospect. So that's why teams like him. But again, he's out of options. So it's really tough to maneuver him on your roster. Now, I think what the Orioles like, and I talked about this in the past, is the breaking stuff has good movement. It gets good swing and miss, the curveball and the sweeper. And he still throws pretty hard. I mean, he's 95, 96 with his four-seamer and his sinker. It's just that he's trying to find which fastball is going to work best for him, which mixing is going to work best for him. Like in 2023, he threw more sliders than any other pitch. Then he went back to a heavier four-seam approach this year. The Pirates are pretty good at this. The Angels are not a pitching development team you want to be with. So maybe if he does stick with the Orioles and a really good pitching development that we have in Baltimore, he can actually sit down and find out, okay, what among my stuff is going to work? And listen, again, 25-year-old former top prospect who's had success in the major leagues recently. This is not a guy that teams want to just give up on yet. That's why so many different organizations have wanted a piece of him and have claimed him on waivers this offseason. But the thing is, and I've talked about it with other Orioles players so far this winter, is that the O's are trying to play that roster churn with Contreras. It's something they've done with some other players recently. Luis Vasquez is one we just found out the Orioles basically claimed from the Cubs, put him right on waivers. He cleared waivers. Now he stays in the Orioles organization in AAA and is off the 40-man roster, and it's a depth piece that the Orioles liked. They're trying to do the same thing with Contreras. That's what they tried to do last time they claimed him. They DFA'd him again because you look at it this way. The Orioles are in the 20s in the waiver process right now. All 30 teams, you get placed based on the reverse order of your record. So the worst teams get the first chance at claiming players when they go on waivers. So the Orioles are somewhere in the 20s. So if the Orioles are able to claim a player, that means, say, 22 other teams already said, no, we don't want that guy. So if you're the Orioles and you claim Contreras, you say, okay, if we waive him and he passes through waivers, he gets to stay with our organization in AAA and come off the 40-man roster. So if you're the Orioles, and let's say it is 22 teams ahead of you that have already said no, you should logically be saying, okay, if we waive him again, then there's only 6 more teams behind us who have to say no. The chances are in our favor, and we'll be able to keep him. Now, unfortunately, the Yankees, who, of course, with a better season last year, went to the World Series, are behind the Orioles in the waiver order. They also had interest in Contreras, and so they picked him up. But it happened again where the Yankees said no. The Orioles get him again after 22 teams. Now, the Orioles are thinking, okay, it got through 27, 28 teams last time. Then the Yankees said yes, but the Yankees said no this time. So if the Yankees are really willing to say no again, maybe we can pass Contreras through this time. So in the next couple of days, weeks, whatever the next time is, the Orioles need to make a move to put a player on the 40-man roster. I can pretty much guarantee you that Roansy Contreras is going to get DFA'd again by the Orioles. And this time, the hope is that he clears waivers, gets outrighted to AAA Norfolk, and the Orioles can spend spring training and early this year in AAA working with Contreras, not just as a reliever. I think they still believe he can be a starter at the big leagues. And if you can get a guy like that on waivers into your organization and work with him, I think there's still a lot there. Like, we talk a lot about these depth waiver claim pieces the Orioles continue to bring in all offseason. Contreras is one of the most exciting ones. Like, he still has maybe the highest upside of any of these guys they've brought in. And that is why they're claiming him again. They clearly see something that they can tweak with Contreras when they get him into camp. And so hopefully, and he's probably going to be in camp with the Orioles at this point. I mean, unless he gets DFA'd again in the next 3 to 4 days, he'll report to camp in Sarasota. The question just is how long he remains on that 40-man and if he can clear waivers this time and the Orioles can get their hands on him and really start to work with him and try to basically fix him throughout this season. Now, to make room for Roansy Contreras, the Orioles made another move that I felt was coming at some point, and that was they DFA'd center fielder Daz Cameron because the 40-man roster was full, so Cameron loses his spot. Cameron had come over from the A's very early in the offseason when the O's were kind of stockpiling those depth kind of right-handed hitting outfielders to fill in on their roster. Of course, they then added Dylan Carlson. Then they added Ramon Laureano, both on one-year deals. Both of those guys probably go ahead of Daz Cameron in the pecking order. Once they added Carlson, there was still a chance to keep Cameron because it's like, well, Cameron doesn't have options. Carlson does. You could work the roster there, especially if Jorge Mateo starts the year on the injured list. But once they signed Ramon Laureano to another major league deal, Cameron being third on that list, there's just really no chance he was ever going to make the opening day roster. He was going to have to be put on waivers when that was not the case. So he became really the most expendable guy left on that 40-man, and that is why he was DFA'd. We know the Orioles love Daz Cameron. He was in AAA with the O's in 2023. They almost called him up at the end of that season when Mullins and Aaron Hicks were both injured and Kowser was struggling. He was on the brink of being brought to the big leagues. So you know they like him. He was, of course, originally a Mike Elias draft pick back in Houston. So they're going to hope he does clear waivers and stay with the organization. But I think Daz Cameron has enough juice, played enough in the big leagues with the A's last year that someone might take a chance on him. But we will certainly see, and I'm sure they'd like to at least keep Cameron as depth in AAA and in camp if they have the possibility to. But speaking of depth in camp, that is what we're going to talk about to finish off this show. Non-roster invitees have been announced by the Orioles. Who are they? What is a non-roster invitee? And which ones have a chance to make an impact at the big leagues for the O's in 2025? That's coming up next. So the Orioles have announced their list of non-roster invitees to big league spring training here in 2025. First, let's start with who are non-roster invitees. Basically, these are players who are not currently on the 40-man roster, who the Orioles are still going to have with them in Sarasota for the big league version of spring training. Now, all the minor leaguers, when they go to spring training, they usually go to the Twin Lakes facility, which is kind of minor league camp. But some of them get the call up, at least for a while, to big league camp. But it's usually a split for each team's non-roster invitees. Now, the Orioles announced 26 of them, and there's already a couple more that they have added to the list since they announced this, I believe, on Thursday or Friday of last week. But the non-roster invitees usually fall into two categories. One is some of your upper-level prospects, guys in AA and AAA who you like, usually some of your higher-ranked prospects, who you want to at least get a brief look at facing major league-style pitching in big league camp. Some of these guys are competing for an opening day roster spot. Some of them are just probably going to start the year in AAA, but are getting a look at big league camp for a while before they go back to minor league camp. And then the other group of guys are players who you signed to minor league deals this offseason with invites to big league spring training. These are guys who you're taking a flyer on, you're giving them a shot to impress you. If they don't, they can be AAA depth. If they do, maybe they can steal an opening day roster spot. That is usually the split. Probably the most famous NRI last year for the Orioles was Albert Suarez, because he came in and he dominated in spring training. We were like, who is this guy? And they call him up in April, and the rest was history. He was huge for the Orioles last season. So maybe one of these guys could be the next Albert Suarez. I wouldn't guarantee it. It is really tough to come in from where he was and do what Albert Suarez did, but you never know. Things like this could happen. And the Orioles are certainly hoping that they can at least find somebody out of this group who can help them in some way this season, right? These aren't guys who you are expecting the world out of. These are guys who are going to bring you depth and could give you some innings or give you some at-bats when you need them. So I'm just going to read out all of the names on this list, and then we're going to dive into a couple of the important names that you should know. So for the pitchers, there are 12 of them, at least on this list, and I'll talk about the extra ones as well. But we have some minor league deal guys, Raul Alcantara, we have Matt Bowman, we have Jacob Hernandez, we have Yaramil Geraldo, we have Corbin Martin, we have Robinson Martinez, Rodolfo Martinez, and then you have some guys, this includes Corbin Martin and Jacob Hernandez, who were in the minors with the Orioles last year after coming in on like waiver claims in minor league deals. So not exactly like the big prospects, but not exactly minor league contracts this offseason. They're kind of holdovers. That's Levi Stout. That's Thaddeus Ward. That's Nathan Webb. Corbin Martin's in that mix as well. And then you have a couple of prospect pitchers, Justin Armbruster and Carlos Tavera, in that mix as well. 4 catchers coming up. You always need a lot of catchers on your NRI list because they catch a lot of bullpens. They do a lot of work in spring training. So the Orioles have a couple of prospects in Silas Ardway and Maverick Hanley. They have David Banuelos, who's been their taxi squad catcher for the last 2 years, and they love. And then Samuel Basallo is on this list as well. We'll get to that. In the infielders, you have Nick Gordon, Jeremiah Jackson, Vimiel Machine, and Terran Vavra, who all came in on minor league deals. And then Levon Soto, who was outrighted off the 40-man roster, but of course appeared with the Orioles at times in the big leagues last year. And then in the outfield, it's 3 prospects and 2 minor league deals. Jordan Adams and, interestingly, Franklin Barreto, who's been an infielder his whole career, but the Orioles signed him to a minor league deal and is listed as an outfielder here, is on this list. And then the 3 prospects in Dylan Beavers, Judd Fabian, and Enrique Bradfield Jr. A little interesting that Vance Honeycutt is not on this list, but sometimes you need a full year in the minor leagues before you get this invite. But those are the players. Now, there are already a couple names that have been added here. Dylan Coleman, who the Orioles signed to a minor league deal on Saturday, is going to be on this list, a right-handed pitcher. We're going to talk about him actually on tomorrow's episode, so he'll be on here. Also, Luis Vasquez, the infielder the Orioles got from the Cubs last week, who did clear waivers to stay in the organization. He is going to be another infielder added to this list and is going to be in big league spring training. And then we have not gotten an update, at least at time of recording, on Emmanuel Rivera. He has been on waivers for over a week now. It should be about time for that to come up, but if Rivera does clear waivers and stay with the O's, Emmanuel Rivera will also be on this list and be in big league camp with the Orioles. And then, if they're able to clear Roansy Contreras off waivers this time and keep him, he would be on here as well. But it's an interesting group. You got 12 pitchers, 14 position players, 4 catchers. I wanted to give you 3 pitchers and 3 hitters you really need to watch out for. You need to know, you want to keep an eye on if any of the spring training games are on Matson. The Orioles only have 13 of their spring training games that are actually on StatCast for Baseball Savant, where we'll get that hard data, but still keeping an eye on those games, on these guys. Here's the 3 pitchers. The first one is right-handed pitcher Matt Bowman. He was with the Orioles in 2024. They signed him kind of late in the season, and he was pretty good for the O's down the stretch. Now, he didn't end up making the postseason roster. He was kind of the last cut from that roster, but he was a somewhat important middle reliever for them down the stretch. They brought him back on a minor league deal. I would say of all the pitchers, all 12 arms on this list, he has, I would think, by far the best chance of making the opening day roster. Like if a reliever, especially if a reliever, there's an injury that comes up in camp, if we learn about an injury when Mike Elias speaks to the media for the first time at camp later this week, Matt Bowman is all of a sudden a guy that I think slots in who could absolutely make that opening day roster as a middle reliever. Next one is right-handed pitcher Nathan Webb. Kind of an interesting story here. Last offseason, he signed a 2-year minor league deal with the Orioles. He had spent his entire minor league career with the Royals, had gotten to AAA, but had never appeared in the big leagues, became a minor league free agent, and the Orioles signed him to a 2-year minor league deal because he was undergoing and then coming back from Tommy John surgeries. The Orioles knew, hey, if we sign him to a 1-year deal, he might miss this entire season. So let's get him now, help him rehab. We like his stuff, and then he'll be back in maybe 2024 late or 2025 or whatever it may be. But it was kind of like, hey, we think he'll pitch some in 2024. We don't know how much. Let's sign him to a 2-year deal. Well, he was coming back from Tommy John. It was kind of TBD on how much in 2024. And then in May of 2024, when he was rehabbing from Tommy John, he tore his Achilles. So even as he was rehabbing the elbow, torn Achilles, and he's out for the 2024 season no matter what. So now, health-wise, it seems like he's going to be good for spring training. We will see. But it's finally a name we'll get to put some eyes on in the Orioles system. 27-year-old righty who had spent his entire career with Kansas City in the minors. He was high 90s fastball, topped out at 101 with a slider and a changeup. Kind of interesting stuff from this right-hander. Intrigued to see him in camp. And the final one is right-handed pitcher Justin Armbruster. He was the Orioles' 12th round pick out of New Mexico in the 2021 MLB draft. Was once one of the better pitching prospects in the Orioles system. Mid-90s fastball with a slider, a good changeup, and a cutter to go with it. And the stuff is still really good. He got kind of fully to AAA last season. But once he has gotten to AAA, his command has vanished. He jumped up to a 12% walk rate in AAA. He was having real walk struggles at times last year. He was still the number 33 ranked prospect in the O system via Fangraphs in their midseason list in 2024. But he showed a lot of command issues last year. The question is now, he had still been a starter. Do the Orioles kind of fully move him into the bullpen and look at him as a relief prospect, as he's most likely going to, again, begin the year with the Norfolk Tides here in 2025? I think they should move him to the pen. I think you can work on the command issues there. The stuff can play up even more, and I think he could be an interesting reliever. So I think it's interesting to watch if the O's do use him in more of a relief role in big league camp to kind of see what he can do against major league hitters. Speaking of hitters, the 3 hitters to know, the first one, of course, is Samuel Basallo. Depending on how you slice it, either the Orioles' number 1 or number 2 prospect, but a consensus top 10, top 15 prospect in baseball. 20-year-old, huge left-handed hitting catcher. Still needs some catching work defensively, but the arm is amazing. The bat is awesome. Got great bat-to-ball skills. I want to see him face big league pitching. He's not going to make the opening day roster, but it's not out of the question that Basallo could debut for the Orioles at some point in 2025. I'm targeting like a September call-up debut for Samuel Basallo. Such an exciting prospect and awesome to see him in big league camp. Dylan Beavers is here as well, another top 10 Orioles prospect, former second-round pick. Got his first taste of AAA late in 2024 with 6 games at the end of the season, but this will really be the first chance to see him against MLB pitching. He's gone through multiple swing changes, alterations since the Orioles drafted him with kind of a weird swing out of Cal, but all the data was there, plays good defense, hits the ball hard. Just an intriguing outfield prospect who's going to be in AAA this year. It could be a big league option in 2026. So kind of a first look at him coming now. And then finally, of course, Enrique Bradfield Jr. Orioles first round pick in 2023 out of Vanderbilt, number 3 prospect in the system. Got to AA in 2024, so he'll kind of get that taste of big league camp. We know the speed is elite. We know the defense in center field is elite. We know the contact is elite. But the question is, how much serious damage doing contact can he make with the bat? That's where all the questions are surrounding Bradfield if he can become a major league starter. And this might be really our first taste to see, okay, a big league fastball, what can Bradfield do against pitches like that? And I will certainly be watching closely when he gets into these big league camp games. But those are their NRIs, the non-roster invitees. And camp is starting later this week. The first workout is on Thursday. We are closer and closer. And of course, here on the podcast, because of that, we are back to 5 days a week on the pod. So make sure you are commenting, and subscribing to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel, subscribing wherever you listen, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Leave a 5-star rating and a review if you can. That really, really helps out the show. We're going to go Sunday through Thursday this week, but after that, it'll be Monday through Friday, 5 episodes per week on the pod. And we will be back tomorrow, where we are going to chat about a couple of minor league deals. I mentioned Terrin Vavra. He is back. I mentioned Dylan Coleman. Both of them brought in on minor league deals by the Orioles. We'll talk about how they could fit into this roster and why Coleman has a chance to actually pitch in the bullpen, pitch serious innings for the Orioles in 2025. That's coming up on tomorrow's episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.